Welcome to this quiet moment, a gentle invitation to explore some of the most profound ideas that have shaped human thought for centuries. Tonight, we'll embark on a tranquil journey into the heart of Buddhist philosophy, a serene contemplation of change, of what we understand as birth, and of that mysterious realm we call death, and the intriguing notion of the unborn. This isn't a lecture, dear listener, but rather a soft narrative designed to quiet your mind and guide you toward a deeper sense of peace, allowing the gentle currents of these ancient wisdoms to lull you softly into a restful sleep. So, as you settle in, perhaps nestling deeper into your pillow, or simply letting your body soften where it rests, allow these thoughts to unfold around you like quiet whispers in the twilight. It's a curious observation, isn't it? How certain ideas from ancient traditions resonate so deeply within us, even across vast oceans and cultures. Many in the Western world, for instance, find themselves drawn to philosophies like Hinduism or Buddhism, often captivated by the concept that we commonly understand as reincarnation or rebirth. There's a particular appeal to it, a sense of a more expansive individual story, a tapestry of existence stretching far beyond the confines of a single lifetime. This perspective often feels more satisfying, perhaps, than the choices traditionally offered by Western thought. On one hand, there's the Christian view, suggesting that this earthly life, in its relatively brief span of perhaps fourscore years and 10, determines one's eternal destiny. And on the other, the materialistic view, which posits that you live but once, and when consciousness fades, it simply ends, a fleeting spark between two vast eternal darknesses. For many thoughtful individuals, neither of these prospects feels entirely comforting, leaving a yearning for something more, a narrative that offers a deeper sense of continuity and purpose. And so, the idea of a soul on a grand pilgrimage, an individual journey unfolding across countless forms of life, takes root. The thought that from some ancient, obscure origin, one might have begun as a simpler creature, gradually ascending through various forms, step by step, until finally arriving at the profound privilege of appearing in human form, this holds a certain quiet allure. Indeed, within both Hindu and Buddhist traditions, the human form is considered an extraordinarily privileged position. For according to their shared ancient cosmology, there exist 6 distinct domains of beings, each offering a unique landscape of experience. Imagine, if you will, a great wheel, softly turning in your mind's eye, divided into these 6 realms. At its very apex, shining softly, is the realm of the devas. The word deva itself whispers of the divine, akin to angels, embodying an experience of pure bliss, a state of radiant happiness, directly opposite. At the very bottom of this cosmic wheel lies the Naraka world, a place of beings experiencing torment, a dimension of profound horror, sometimes depicted as realms of ceaseless screams, a vivid portrayal of absolute suffering. These two poles, bliss and torment, define the extreme edges of experience. Between them, the other realms unfurl. Moving gently clockwise around the wheel from the devas, we encounter the asuras. These are often described as wrathful beings, embodying divine anger, a forceful and passionate energy. Continuing our journey, we come to the animal world, encompassing all creatures that live primarily for the fulfillment of basic needs, the immediate demands of body and instinct. Below them we revisit the Naraka world, sometimes thought of as a kind of purgatory, a space of intense and profound suffering. And then ascending once more, we find the realm of the pretas, often called frustrated beings. Iconographically, they are depicted with immense bellies and impossibly tiny mouths, a poignant image of insatiable appetite, coupled with minimal means of satisfaction, a spiritual bottleneck, you might say. born of perpetual longing. Finally, nestled between the pretas and the devas, we arrive at the human world. This realm is understood to occupy a unique middle position. It is from the human state that liberation is considered most accessible, for the devas, in their boundless bliss, are often too content to seek liberation. The asuras, consumed by their fury, too agitated. The animals, too bound by instinct. The narakas, too steeped in torment. And the pretas, too consumed by their frustration. The human condition, with its unique blend of joy and sorrow, of desire and reflection, provides the perfect crucible for spiritual awakening. Now, you need not interpret this cosmology as a literal blueprint of the universe, dear friend. Instead, you can softly consider these 6 domains as powerful, evocative depictions of various states of the human mind, the shifting moods and experiences we can all traverse within ourselves. They are, in a very real sense, all held within the vast landscape of your own consciousness, as we shall gently explore further. The popular understanding, then, is that one might reincarnate repeatedly through these 6 worlds, guided by the currents of karma. If, for instance, this human life is lived in a way that fosters anger and fury, one might be reborn as an asura. If one dedicates life solely to the immediate gratification of the senses, a life merely for back and belly, an animal rebirth might follow. Acts of profound cruelty, it is said, could lead to the naraka realms. Conversely, engaging in virtuous deeds, actions that cultivate goodness and compassion, could lead to rebirth in the Deva world, or into increasingly favorable circumstances within the human realm itself. This popular understanding, as we discussed earlier, is often perceived by Westerners as a comforting notion, opening up vast vistas of future development, offering endless opportunities to work out one's destiny. It even invites romantic musings about past lives, wondering if a deep connection with another soul is a karmic echo from an ancient encounter. Yet, here lies a subtle paradox, a gentle shift in perspective that distinguishes the Eastern understanding from many Hindus and Buddhists who embrace the concept of rebirth. They do so not because it brings comfort, but because they perceive it as a fundamental, inescapable reality. And the entire purpose of their spiritual practice, their sadhana, is not to perpetuate this cycle, but rather to find a way to transcend it, to step out of the endless round of rebirth altogether. This is why, for those deeply immersed in these traditions, the Western attraction to reincarnation as a comforting idea can often evoke a gentle smile, a quiet irony. Joseph Campbell, a man renowned for his profound understanding of mythology, once shared a delightful anecdote that perfectly illustrates this point. He recounted sitting with a Vedanta Swami, one of those wise teachers from the Vedanta Society, who, in a moment of quiet reflection, mused, "Oh dear me, you know, the idea of rebirth is so wonderful. I truly think it is the most comforting notion." And Joe, with his characteristic directness, gently but firmly responded, "Swami, don't be a damn fool. What are you talking about? Rebirth being comforting. Don't you realize that's precisely what you're supposed to get away from?" The Swami, startled by this gentle jolt of insight, paused, then slowly, with a dawning realization, exclaimed, "Oh yes, of course." I recall a similar, equally amusing conversation with another Swami. We were discussing the underlying unity of all existence, the idea that behind the myriad forms of this world there lay a single divine principle. He spoke eloquently about this, describing it as the One. I listened, and then, with a respectful tone, I gently interjected, "Swami, you cannot speak of it as one. You know very well that Brahman, the ultimate reality, isn't one because one implies an opposite. Many. Brahman has no opposite. You should speak of Brahman as the non-dual." And again he paused, then chuckled. "You talk just like a Hindu." These moments, these gentle clashes of cultural understanding, reveal how deeply Western perspectives, influenced by centuries of thought, can sometimes subtly alter the understanding of ancient Eastern traditions. Indeed, some suggest that the long British occupation of India even contributed to a certain perversion of these deeply rooted traditions. What is truly fascinating, however, is that within Buddhism, despite this widespread understanding of the desire to escape rebirth, a very strong belief in reincarnation still prevails across all Buddhist countries, and yet Buddhism explicitly and unequivocally denies the existence of any individual, unchanging, reincarnating soul. This is where the path becomes truly subtle, truly profound, and truly relaxing to contemplate, as it invites a dissolution of rigid concepts. At the heart of this understanding lies a fundamental Buddhist doctrine known as the three signs of becoming, or bhava. Bhava, a Sanskrit word, conveys the sense of growth, of continuous change, of an unfolding process rather than a static state of being. These three signs describe the essential nature of this ceaseless becoming. The first is dukkha, a term often translated as suffering, but perhaps more accurately and universally understood as frustration. Imagine it as the subtle sourness that pervades life, in contrast to sukha, which is sweet. Dukkha points to a basic characteristic of all living beings. Life, for all its beauty and joy, invariably leads to some form of frustration. We desire more than we can ever fully grasp or sustain. We constantly overreach the limits of possibility. And ultimately, to every form of existence, death arrives as a dissolution, a letting go, often perceived as an unfortunate, inevitable collapse. The second sign is anicca, which means impermanence. It reminds us gently that everything is in a constant state of flux, ever-changing, never static. The opposite of anicca is anicca, meaning eternal. But the Buddhist insight is that all phenomena are anicca, perpetually flowing, never fixed, always transforming. And finally, the third and perhaps most challenging sign is anatman. This term anatman translates as no self or no soul. To a Western mind conditioned by centuries of thought about an enduring individual soul, this can sound like a rather unsettling idea. We associate soulless with a lack of feeling, a deficiency of humanity. Christian theology, for example, has often drawn a distinction between humans and animals based on the presence or absence of a soul. But in Buddhism, the meaning is entirely different, far from a judgment or a lack. To translate Atman, the self, the soul as the Christian concept of soul is in this context rather misleading. And Atman points to a deeper truth, that nothing possesses its own intrinsic independent essence or swabhav, which means one's own nature or self-nature. The profound insight here is that no individual thing, no distinct phenomenon of any kind, exists in isolation. Its very existence is entirely dependent on and intertwined with its relationships to all other things. Consider this for a moment, gently. You, as you are right now, exist as you are, only because of your intricate, myriad relationships to everything else in the universe. This understanding reveals the entire cosmos as a vast, interconnected system of interdependence. Think of two simple sticks leaning against each other. By themselves they would fall, but together, supporting one another, they stand, forming an inverted V. This image is often used in Japan to symbolize the Chinese character for man, suggesting that humanity cannot exist without mutual support, a profound basis for brotherhood and harmonious social relationships. But beneath this social teaching lies an even more profound philosophical insight. The universe coheres, holds together, because everything depends on everything else. Nothing truly exists alone, in its own right, utterly independent of the rest. And that, in its most serene essence, is what an Atman signifies. It means you do not possess an indestructible, immortal soul that is simply you, forever and ever, independent of anything else existing at all. It also implies that there isn't some ethereal, gaseous spook, an etheric double or astral body, that simply detaches from your physical form at death and migrates to a new incarnation. This, then, has been the elegant puzzle that Buddhist philosophers have explored with profound subtlety for centuries: how to reconcile the belief in rebirth with the simultaneous denial of an individual, enduring spiritual entity, a spook independent of the physical body. The most intricate discussions in all Buddhist literature revolve around this very enigma. A cornerstone text of early Buddhism, The Questions of King Milinda, beautifully illustrates this. King Milinda, a Greek ruler in the succession of Alexander the Great's Eastern Empire, engaged in deep conversations with the Buddhist sage Nagasena. Nagasena endeavors with great patience and wisdom to explain to the king how a continuing process of rebirth can occur without any fixed individual self or soul actually being reborn. And so this is the gentle question we now consider: how can there be a continuous unfolding of life, a process of becoming without anything substantial being carried along by it? You might immediately recognize that much of this apparent paradox resides in the very way we conceive of and use language in our deeply ingrained ideas of continuity. Let's contemplate a familiar image: a simple ripple in a pond. You throw a stone into the water, and from that central point, a series of rings gracefully emerge, expanding outwards. These are waves, and you can, in your mind's eye, select one and follow its journey, declaring, "I am watching a wave." But what truly is a wave? You know, don't you, that no specific volume of water, no particular individual molecules, are actually moving outwards from the point where the pebble dropped. The water itself, in terms of its lateral movement, largely remains in place. Instead, the water molecules are moving up and down, creating these undulations, and these rhythmic up and down movements create the compelling illusion of a distinct thing, a wave, traveling across the surface. Consider another visual illusion, like the revolving stripes on a barber's pole. It seems as though something is continuously moving upwards, from the bottom of the pole to the top, yet in reality, the stripes are merely spiraling around the pole. What appears to be a thing moving is in fact only motion itself, an abstract pattern. This gentle understanding lies at the very root of the Indian concept of Maya, the world perceived as a construct, an artful illusion. It suggests that certain aspects of our reality exist primarily in your mind, although we must be very precise about what we mean by that, a nuance we will softly explore later. This, then, is a profound point to consider for deep relaxation. The spiritual disciplines of Hinduism and Buddhism suggest that you can be delivered from the cycle of rebirth as soon as you are relieved of the tenacious illusion that a fixed, continuous something is constantly going on, linking one moment to the next, like an unbroken chain. In a revered Zen text, the Platform Sutra, attributed to the sixth patriarch Yearning, there is a passage that whispers this very truth. If we allow our thoughts, past, present, and future, to link up into a continuous series, we put ourselves under restraint. But it continues, if we simply see that there is just this thought, and then this thought, and then this thought, you are liberated. This deeply insightful idea also echoes in the work of T.S. Eliot, particularly in his four quartets. He speaks of boarding a train, settling into your compartment with a newspaper, embarking on a journey. But the person who ultimately arrives at the destination, he suggests, will not, in a fundamental sense, be the same person who left the platform at the beginning. It's just like this, dear listener. You, who are settling into this moment now, are not, in an absolute sense, the same person who began listening a little while ago. This profound and subtle truth can be beautifully illuminated by the simple image of a candle flame. A candle flame appears to be a constant, identifiable thing. We give it a name, a flame. Yet, in reality, it is an incessant stream of hot, incandescent energy. The gaseous molecules that make up the flame are constantly moving upwards, disappearing, as the flame continuously converts the candle wax into gas. Just as we identify this dynamic process as a flame, giving it a noun, when it is in fact flaming, a verb, an ongoing process, so too is every human being a process. You and I, in this very moment, are like that flame. We are the continuous conversion of air and water and light, and the nourishment we take in into the flowing, vibrant energy that constitutes our being. We are a dynamic, ever-changing vibration, a current through which all these elements flow. Not for one single moment are we absolutely the same. And so this understanding leads to a truly liberating interpretation of the Buddhist doctrine. You who lives in this precise moment, the you who hears these words now, is never truly going to die. For the one that will eventually dissolve and cease will not be the you that is here in this present instant. Likewise, the you that is here now, in this ever-present moment, was never truly born in the first place, never truly began as a fixed, enduring entity. This profound insight is beautifully articulated by Dogen, a magnificent Zen philosopher who lived around 1200 AD. He expressed it with simple elegance. The spring does not become the summer, and the summer does not become the autumn. No one, he observed, would truly assert that spring becomes summer. Rather, there is spring, and then there is summer. Each exists in its own right, complete unto itself. He offered another compelling image. When you burn wood, there are ashes, but the wood does not become the ashes. There is wood, and then there is ashes. Each moment, each state, is as it were, sufficient unto itself. They are like distinct steps, or perhaps more aptly, like the crests of waves. Just as the water itself doesn't move laterally across the surface, so too, by this analogy, spring does not become summer. But our minds, accustomed to imposing continuity, observe the successive moments and project motion onto the up and down undulations of the water, and so we say, the spring becomes the summer. In precisely the same way we observe the sequence of life. The baby becomes the adolescent, becomes the man, becomes the crone, becomes the corpse. But the Buddhists, with their profound insight into impermanence, gently suggest, no, these states simply follow one another, in the same way as the apparent motion of a wave. The gentle whisper to the wise, then, is this: live fully in the moment you are in. There is truly no other place to be. If you realize this, if you see through this subtle illusion of a continuous, unchanging you, then you will understand that you will not truly die, and you were never truly born. Now, such a perspective might, at first hearing, sound as if it's proposing a universe that is atomistic, fundamentally discontinuous, suggesting that all existence is nothing but a series of isolated point instances. This way of thinking can be seen as an extension of a Western philosophical tradition known as nominalism. Nominalism, in opposition to realism, argues that universal concepts, like mankind, are merely abstractions or names. The nominalists assert that there is no such thing as a concrete, universal mankind. There are only individual people. This viewpoint has indeed become quite prevalent in the 20th century. For instance, we might say that the United States of America is a political abstraction, and what truly exists are just the individual people who live within its borders. But if you follow nominalism to its ultimate, logical conclusion, you arrive at a rather startling realization that you as a coherent entity might not exist at all, a human being, an abstraction. All that truly exists, one might argue, are the molecules that comprise your cells, which themselves can be further dissolved into nuclear particles. And then, you might say, well, that's all there is, just these fundamental particles. Yet you quickly realize there's no end to this line of reasoning. With sufficient imagination and precise instruments, any unit of existence, of motion, of energy, can always be further subdivided into even smaller units of measurement. And then one might claim, the smaller things are, the more real things are. But this is a circular argument, isn't it? Because you can play the game in the exact opposite direction. Oh no, one could argue. Since all small things only exist relatively, in relation to each other, the only truly real thing is the big thing. Therefore, all those small particles are, in a sense, relatively unreal. The only thing that is truly real is the entire universe itself, and that is so vast, so encompassing, that no single mind can fully conceive it. Do you see then how philosophical arguments can often become a fascinating game, a dance of words and concepts? People argue, playing with language, moving up and down the scale of existence, debating which level of bits, collections of bits, or the bits themselves, is the truly real one. I've observed with a certain quiet amusement, through experiences with altered states of consciousness, that such conversations are perfect examples of what has always unfolded in philosophy. People engage in animated discussions about what seems on the surface to be nothing at all except the very processes of grammar and abstraction. Imagine a conversation where no specific names are used, no proper nouns, nothing concrete is. And in all this, in this grand, intricate game, there comes a point that we might call emotional investment. This is when we begin to feel that the outcome of a particular feature in the game is not merely interesting, but urgent. It suddenly matters, and this word matter has a beautiful double meaning, doesn't it? It means something substantial, something material, but it also means something important. It matters. And it is entirely up to you, in the deepest sense, what you choose to believe matters. We teach our children what matters, what's important for them to learn, and fundamentally we teach them that it's important to live, to go on. This imperative, you must go on, is presented as terribly important. Consider a child with profound cognitive differences, who might not grasp this societal insistence on going on. They might seem to not give a damn, quite content in their immediate experience, simply having a ball where they are. From our societal perspective, they might appear incompetent, unadapted, even useless, because they don't understand the urgency of perpetuating existence, of striving, of conforming. They simply goof off. And in a way, every being in this world is perpetually torn between these two impulses, the urge to go on and the desire to goof off. This tension forms the very basis of our distinction between work and play. We all understand the need for leisure, for time to goof off, but there's a perceived imperative to return to work, to farm, to fish, to manufacture, to produce, so that life in its grand collective sense can go on. But when we embrace this terrifying urgency to go on, when we deeply feel this is important, this matters, we inadvertently screen out of our consciousness the profound truth that this urgency is, in essence, our own volition, our own game. We become captivated by the illusion of the absolute necessity and importance of continuing, of keeping other people going on, of raising children to continue, of perpetuating this whole magnificent, intricate thing. The inherent difficulty here is that as we become overly disturbed and anxious about this survival imperative, it paradoxically becomes more difficult to keep the game going smoothly. The more intensely we are concerned with our survival, the more we tend to fight, to compete, to clash with others over resources, real or perceived. All the ancient conflicts and struggles resurface, and it is precisely these conflicts, rooted in a panicked attachment to survival, that are, at this very moment, endangering the entire human project. All of it fundamentally is predicated on the illusion that our survival is utterly important. A little while before he passed away, the brilliant physicist Robert Oppenheimer contemplatively remarked, "It is perfectly obvious that the whole world is going to hell. It's going to blow up. There is no way that it can be stopped, except that we don't try to stop it happening." This is a profound statement, isn't it? He was hinting that the very panic, the terror, the desperate effort to prevent a catastrophe might be the most powerful force driving us towards it. It's like a person standing at the edge of a precipice, gripped by an overwhelming fear of falling. This intense fear can cause their muscles to weaken, their legs to wobble, making them more likely to fall, simply because of their fear of falling. But beneath all this, what truly underlies this fear, this urgency, this panic? It is the persistent illusion that I am going on, that I constitute a real, continuous entity from this moment to the next, and the next, and the next. What, ultimately, are you afraid of losing when you die? All the experiences you've gathered, the friends you've made, the status you've achieved, the skills you've honed, all that you remember, all that you've acquired as an individual, is ordinarily understood to be destroyed. In essence, we are afraid of losing the past. It seems profoundly clear to me that when you die, yes, everything you've acquired as an individual, everything stored in your unique brain, will indeed dissolve and be distributed back into the great stream of existence. But at the same time, it is equally clear that when you die, there will not simply be an everlasting nothingness following the moment of death. That would be as fundamentally illogical as imagining that you immediately ascend to some ethereal heaven to join saints and angels. The liberating point is this: when you dissolve, you are always in a profound sense reborn de novo, anew. Just as you, dear listener, gradually arose into being, experiencing the sensation of I in this world, and that I will remain for a while, develop and then gently drop off, so too all the time, everywhere, other eyes are constantly starting up. Whether they be human, animal, or any other form of sentient existence, perhaps even in other galaxies scattered across the vast cosmos, these eyes are always emerging, always coming into being. Now you might ask, is there no connection between them? No, not in the way we typically think of a direct, continuous thread. In the same way, there is no direct, solid connection between the individual molecules in your hand, and yet you experience it as a hand. If you were to look at your hand under a powerful enough microscope, the molecules would appear miles apart from each other on their own scale. You might conclude there's no connection. What is the connection between this galaxy and other galaxies? We can't see any direct connection, and yet there are gravitational currents, subtle influences, whereby they respond to each other, moving in a certain collective order. So in a very similar subtle way, the constant appearance of beings who experience themselves as I constitutes a grand wave motion, and they can indeed be considered individually. What we are doing here, dear friend, is not about setting down a rigid doctrine, but rather offering an exercise in perception, a gentle shift in how you experience reality. You can choose to see yourself, in other words, as existing only now, that this moment is the only you there truly is. The logical alternative to that is to see yourself as everything, Either it must be that you exist in a singular, instantaneous burst bingo, a point instant, here and gone. Imagine a strobe light at a concert, flashing rapidly, on and off, on and off, on and off. It creates the illusion that everyone is constantly appearing and disappearing from existence. In a way, this is a kind of gentle exemplification of the truth. We are vibrations, and everything is constantly appearing and disappearing on and off, on and off. So in one sense, the only truly real thing is the moment of on, where you are, right now. Got it, lost it, got it, lost it. That's one pole of perception. The other pole is the view that all these on and offs, just like the molecules in your hand, constitute a continuous reality. But if you follow that line of reasoning, you must expand your definition of you to encompass not just what you are at this moment, but the entire universe through the whole span of its existence in space and time. Any middle position you attempt to take between these two poles, saying, okay, I'm going to be so much myself, I'm going to call myself this particular human being, who lives for such and such a time, that middle position is ultimately arbitrary. It's simply the way you've chosen to play the game, the rules you've been taught. And if you choose to become attached to that, to get hung up on that definition, you will say, that matters. And so you feel substantial, you feel material. The gentle Buddhist idea is simply saying, don't get hung up on what is called in Sanskrit, drishti, a view, a particular way of looking at things. You say that's looking at it from this point of view. This is the way it seems to me to be, and I'm going to stick to that. To get fixed on that, to become attached to that, is the very meaning of attachments, or klesha. In Sanskrit, Sakaya Drishi means the view of separateness, the deeply ingrained belief that this particular bundle of wiggles, taken from the total wiggliness of all that exists, is me, and another distinct bundle of wiggles is very definitely you. And to get stuck on that, you see, to become rigid in that perception, is what gives rise to conflict, to sorrow, to crying, and weeping, and gnashing of teeth, all rooted in this fierce belief that this thing is real. This is precisely what these wise Buddhist and Hindu sages are gently trying to help people release. They whisper, wake up, wake up, wake up. Don't you understand? The whole thing is an illusion. Not that illusion is a word to put it down, to say it's horrible or bad. No, quite the opposite. If you could truly see that the whole thing is a grand, beautiful illusion, you would be as happy as a lark. Life would be lived with far more joy by everyone. We would dance together, give things away freely, and stop fighting. If we truly saw it as an illusion, we would all be blissfully happy in our magnificent dream. But we are constantly telling ourselves, and we tell our children, it's real, damn it, it's real. And death is going to be awful, and sickness is going to be horrible. We say it's real, and you better watch out. People often say to me, you can say all this as a philosopher, talk about illusion, because you're sitting in a comfortable place, you've got plenty to eat. But you just wait until the thing hits you, you'll laugh out of the other side of your face. Well, dear friend, I don't give a damn. When it happens, it will happen, but it isn't happening now. And what I will do when it does happen, well, sufficient unto the day is the trouble thereof. If you allow yourself to be free, to react as nature dictates when catastrophe falls, you will be okay. But if you spend your entire life standing in a state of anxious preparation for catastrophe, anticipating what's going to happen, you will only torment yourself, developing anxieties and worries long before any actual necessity for them arises. In our gentle contemplation of birth, death, and the unborn, we have been exploring the Buddhist philosophy of change, of life as a flowing, dynamic pattern, an intricate process that is, at its core, immaterial. It isn't anything you can grasp, anything solid. We use words like substance, solid, matter for things we can hold on to, stand on, rely on, cling to. And the fundamental insight of the Buddhist philosophy of change is that there is nothing of that kind. There is nothing truly to hang on to, nothing to rely on, nothing to cling to. But as we noted, when we say something matters, the word carries a double meaning. It implies both that it is substantial and that it is important. And so we are brought up, from the moment of birth, to play the game of life in a very specific way. There are certain things we are told, by adults who were told by their adults who were told by theirs, that these things matter. And one of the most fundamental things we are taught to believe matters is that you must go on living. Thus, everyone becomes tremendously concerned with these things that matter, the values they've been taught to cherish. But because these things in the deepest sense don't actually matter, that is to say because they are not substantial but are all a flowing pattern, we find ourselves in a constant state of subtle frustration. Like a flame which appears to be a substantial, enduring object that can burn you, yet is actually a ceaseless stream of hot gas. Likewise, the human organism is a stream of energy. It is never precisely the same for 2 consecutive seconds. Yet, we have been taught to observe that stream, to cherish it, to value it, and to believe it matters, damn it. And yet we know it will eventually wear out, get sick and die. So everyone is caught in this predicament, playing the game of life in a way that transcends mere play, becoming deadly serious. As a result, existence itself is often experienced in a state of constant frustration, because we are perpetually trying to hold together and preserve something which, in the long run, cannot be preserved at all. And therefore, in response to this silent cry of pain that arises from trying to cling to the ungraspable, the ancient wisdoms of liberation, be they Hindu, Buddhist, or otherwise, gently whisper to us all, look now, cool it. Wake up, see what the scene truly is. This is the kind of thing that's going on. You are not a captive in a trap, not some small, insignificant being somehow thrust into an insane universe. No, you are what the thing is. You are not the victim. You are the system. Only you have identified yourself with one fleeting wave within that system, and have forgotten that you are, in essence, one with the whole, magnificent energy that is constantly flowing. What you're doing, you see, is holding on to a particular way of being, a unique accumulation of memories, associations, skills, things you've learned, and you don't want to let go of them, because in that accumulation, you've found an identity, a sense of where you are, or at least where you think you are. But actually, you don't need to be anywhere. Where is the universe? Think up an answer to that one. And so the question, where is the universe, is in its deepest sense the same question as where are you? So, what this wisdom gently suggests is look, let go. It's perfectly all right to play the game, be involved, engage with the various intrigues, problems, creative projects, and challenges that life offers. That's truly fine. But if you get so deeply involved in it that you become hung up, this very attachment deprives you of the delight and joy inherent in simply playing the game. The whole point, then, is to help people become unhung up on the entire affair. In our traditional translations of Sanskrit and Chinese, we've often used the term unattached, but unhung up is a far more precise and colloquial phrase, a clearer and more direct translation of the Sanskrit word klesha. Klesha signifies a hang-up. It is a blocking, a being fixed on a particular point of view. I hope to illustrate earlier that we can adopt countless different points of view toward what is happening. No single point of view is the right one. Infinitely many perspectives are possible. But if you seize upon one point of view, and you insist that that is the only valid point of view, then you are hung up on it. For instance, if you firmly believe that there are only two kinds of human beings, men and women, and that you must be either one or the other, that too can be a hang-up. Because in reality, we vary a great deal. There are men who possess a far greater proportion of feminine elements within them than others, and women who exhibit more masculine elements than other women. There's an enormous, beautiful spectrum of variation. But as long as you rigidly insist that black is black and white is white, that there are only Republicans and Democrats, capitalists and communists, good guys and bad guys, then you are caught in a hang-up. This also applies to the distinction between what is you and what is other than you. That was the broad terrain we gently traversed earlier, and now I wish to go further in unraveling the fundamental Buddhist idea of rebirth, of our being reincarnated. I mentioned that within Buddhism, this is not conceived as the migration of a spiritual entity, an astral spook, or a fixed soul from one life to another. It is in fact a much simpler idea than that, so simple, in its essence, that it can be difficult to articulate clearly. Let's begin, if you will, with a gentle assumption that every person, every sentient being whatsoever, is in its profoundest sense, I is simply the universe becoming aware of itself at a particular place in time. That is the essence of what the word I truly means. William James once wisely observed, "The word I is a noun of position like this or here, and so the sensation, the feeling we call I is how everything feels on the inside. But it is always situated in a particular place, at a particular time. And these particular places, these particular times, they keep unfolding moment after moment, in myriads of ways, not only on this globe, but very likely in worlds scattered throughout the entire cosmos. The I feeling arises and you feel that you are I just as much as I feel that I am I. And your I feeling and my I feeling are in their fundamental essence the same. We are merely looking from different vantage points, but it is all one vast universal I. We often fail to perceive this because we are hung up on the coming and going of individual I's, on the particular unique circumstances in which each I appears. So, just as the flame of a candle perpetually changes its physical identity every second, every split second, every microsecond, so too do you. You are a continuous stream. Let's imagine for a moment observing the entire human race from a vastly different perspective. Suppose you were an extraterrestrial observer, entirely unfamiliar with human beings, watching what unfolds on this planet from some distant point in space and time. You might observe, well, this world is peopling this planet, much like a tree bears fruit. Year after year, the apples that emerge from an apple tree all look remarkably similar. And you might conclude, yes, the apples come and go, but they're always the same apples coming back. It is only if you examine the apples with exquisite minuteness, studying the subtle details of coloration and formation, that you would perceive one apple as truly distinct from another. We, dear listener, are so accustomed to each other, so intimately familiar with the nuances of human experience, that we readily perceive and emphasize the differences between us. But an observer who knew nothing of humanity would simply witness the coming and going of human beings as a grand, repeating pattern, a ceaseless reiteration of the same fundamental process. It's like the burning flame we discussed. We call it a flame, but it's a repetition of the same process, a continuous flaming, cha-cha-cha-cha-cha. Now, if you were to count each cha as a distinct and separate event, you would lose the rhythm, the overarching flow of the cha-cha-cha. Because of our inherent myopia, our tendency to be fascinated by the intricate details and differentiations between everything that unfolds, the distinctions between individual people, the unique characteristics of different generations, we become so utterly preoccupied with that particular granular view of things that we get hung up on it, and in that fixed perspective, we often fail to perceive that it is, in a profound sense, the same thing happening again and again and again. Every eye that comes into this world, every conscious experience that arises, is in its essence you. You don't need any special hidden information to understand this. No esoteric or spooky knowledge that cannot be demonstrated. It's simply a matter of looking at things as they are, openly, directly facing the truth that all eyes are fundamentally I, wherever they may be scattered. Because you see, this very point here and now is where the universe knows itself from the inside. You look around you and you perceive everything as presenting an exterior to you. How, for instance, might I truly delve into another person's inner experience? There are many ways I can converse with them, encouraging them to articulate their innermost thoughts and feelings. I can share intimacy, a fundamental electrochemical union. I could even, like a surgeon, take a knife and analyze their physical structure. But in all these approaches, my relationship to the other is always one of seeing life from the outside. Even if I were to descend to the tiniest cells that constitute your nervous system, I would still be observing that cell from an external vantage point. If I delved further into the molecules, into the atoms, I would still be regarding them from the outside. The only point at which I truly experience a thing from the inside is precisely where I am. That is where I gain inside knowledge of what everywhere else appears to be outside. And so, if you wish to comprehend the true nature of all this grand unfolding of existence the mystics gently counsel, you must look within. They speak of the inner life within yourself, because that is the unique point at which you know what it's like on the inside. To truly realize this inside experience, there must, of course, simultaneously be an outside. To realize the self, there must be the balancing counterpart of other, for they are as inseparable as black and white, or the back and front of your hand. One cannot exist without the other. So this is our starting point. But it seems perfectly reasonable to suppose, in a much broader sense, that there is a constant rhythmic pulsation of what we call consciousness, of being awake to life, continuing endlessly. Just as stars ignite and fade throughout the cosmos, if galaxies are constantly forming and evolving across the universe, it is equally reasonable to envision that life, in myriad forms, is ceaselessly emerging and unfolding everywhere. And although the distances from our particular human perspective between these islands of life may appear vast and unimaginable, let us not forget that the distances between the molecules in your very own body are equally vast on their own scale. You could, in your mind's eye, zoom in and magnify the inside of your head so that its various elements would seem hundreds of miles apart, and yet, somehow, they remain intricately connected. They hang together. Do not be deceived, then, because distance or space is not merely an absence, not merely nothing. This is the grand delusion, isn't it? The subtle, pervasive error of assuming that space is somehow a thing to be ignored, a void without significance. When Buddhists speak of the root of frustration, or dukkha, as avidya, which means ignorance, or ignoring, or not knowing, this can be beautifully understood through the lens of Gestalt theory of perception. Gestalt theory suggests that our minds naturally tend to notice the figure and largely ignore the background. We pay attention to what is relatively small, enclosed, and defined, and we overlook what is more dispersed, diffuse, and open. We notice what moves vividly against a relatively still backdrop, and that which is still is often ignored. So too, when we encounter a constant stimulus, like the pervasive presence of consciousness itself, we tend to become oblivious to it, to screen it out. Consciousness, by its very nature, tends to notice novel things, new changes in the environment. Therefore, the most profoundly unnoticed things in life are often those that are the most constant and the most regular. And precisely because we lose touch with these most constant and most regular aspects of existence, we screen them out of our general awareness, deeming them insignificant, as if they don't matter, as if they aren't truly there. And of all these ignored background elements, the most universally overlooked is perhaps space itself. Space is always the background. The solid objects are the figures. And so we simply say, space is just nothing. Perhaps around this planet for a short distance, it's filled with air which we notice for a while when we breathe, sensing the whoosh. But beyond that space, we declare, that's nothing at all. The Michelson-Morley experiment even suggested there's no ether in it, reinforcing the idea that it's an utter void. But all this really means is that space is the background to every figure. And just as a figure cannot truly exist without its background, a solid object cannot be there without the space that defines and contains it. And so the space of the world is the one profound thing we have forgotten, yet it is the one thing that is absolutely essential for there to be anything at all. But because, in every direction, the stimulus of space is utterly constant, a pervasive, unchanging presence, we don't notice it. It's just like listening to music on a phonograph. You don't typically consider the fact that all the music you hear, whether it imitates drums, flutes, or human voices, is, at its most fundamental level, simply a vibrating diaphragm. That underlying constant is ignored. We don't say that's not important, but it is important, profoundly so, because without that vibrating diaphragm, there would be no music at all. Space, then, is likewise everywhere, yet we ignore it, because it is common to everything. The ubiquitous, constant background, the perpetual stimulation of consciousness itself, is often forgotten. So we must gently realize that what we label as separate things, separate molecules, separate lives, separate planets, separate stars, separate galaxies, are all profoundly joined by space. Space, in other words, is a relationship between solids. You wouldn't even be able to conceive of space without perceiving a relationship between solid forms. And so the entire profound theory of rebirth in Buddhism is based not on a transmigrating soul, but upon the subtle significance of intervals, the spaces between lives. It's just like this: when you listen to music, you hear melody precisely because you perceive the intervals, the sonic spaces between the tones. If you couldn't hear those intervals, you wouldn't hear melody. People who are tone deaf often hear merely a succession of sounds. They can't grasp why others find delight in music, because they lack the capacity to perceive the subtle relational space between tones following each other in succession, or the intricate intervals between tones played simultaneously in a chord. Isn't that truly magical when you consider it? That music is created, not so much by the tones themselves, but by the distance, the musical or sonic space between them. And this principle extends to everything. It is how it is spaced that creates the significance and interest of any being whatsoever. For example, you might say the human body consists of about 95 cents worth of chemicals. But it's how it's arranged, isn't it? Playing a violin by a great master is, at its most basic, just scraping cat's entrails with horsehair. But it's how it's done. So the order, the precise way things are distributed, is the magic. And that requires spacing how it is spaced. Architects understand this truth intimately. They know that space is real. They speak of using space. When people first hear architects talk, they are often puzzled, for an architect might speak of the function of a space. The ordinary person might wonder, how can space have a function? How can nothing do something? When a physicist speaks of space being curved, how the average person wonders, can space be curved? How can there be properties of space? This confusion arises because the average person is simply brought up to ignore space, to consider it a total non-entity. So then, it is the spaces between what we call solids, instances, points. It is these intervals that make it possible for the points themselves to have some point or significance. After all, if everything were a solid point utterly devoid of interval, nobody would be able to distinguish one point from another. There must be interval. And so when we come to consider the relationships between lives, your past life or a future incarnation, to truly understand this profound concept, I repeat, you do not need any spookery, any mystical or hidden knowledge. It is all perfectly obvious, a matter of shifting your perception. Let me gently demonstrate this to you by inviting you to imagine a simple game, a quiet visualization with pebbles. Imagine I have scattered a handful of small pebbles at random across a wooden floor. Let's consider, for the sake of this gentle illustration, that each pebble represents a human life. And now visualize the wooden slats of the floor extending across, each representing perhaps a century of time, of clock time, of calendar time. So here are these myriad human lives, of different sizes, lengths, representing perhaps how much they traveled, how much space they occupied, scattered across a vast expanse of time. We are looking at them from a kind of celestial vantage point, with a quiet, all-seeing eye of God, observing history unfolding, scattered across time and space. One of the first things we instinctively do, when confronted with a scattered arrangement like this, is to try to make sense of it. Initially, we might think, oh, it's just a mess. But then a second thought often arises, it seems to have some lines of continuity within it. This is especially true, you see, as you quickly begin to pick out patterns, lines. You know how you do this, perhaps lying in bed in the quiet morning, looking at the patterns on a curtain, or lying in a hospital room, gazing at the subtle designs on a ceiling. You begin to pick out themes, designs. Leonardo da Vinci, the great artist, used to find inspiration by looking at old, damp, dirty walls, filled with moisture and mold, and in those patterns he would perceive all kinds of magnificent paintings, which he would then bring forth. The glorious prehistoric cave paintings, found in the south of France, were often created through what's called eidetic vision. Those ancient artists would gaze at the patterns on the cave walls, and in them they would see herds of cattle, figures of people, and they would simply touch them up, giving us those astonishingly vivid and realistic impressions. So, in just the same way as you gaze at this imagined scatter of pebbles on the floor, you can, with a kind of inner eidetic vision, begin to pick out certain continuities. For example, it might be very easy to spot a line, almost a straight line, running through some of these pebbles. A straight line, you see, is an abstract concept, a tool for us to organize our perception. I noticed those are all lined up like that. Is there really a line there, or isn't there? There was no intention to make a line when the pebbles were scattered. They simply fell as they did, but they do appear to form a line. Now, the straight line itself is a concept. It isn't an inherent physical quality in the pebbles themselves, and yet at the same time, I can see it that way. So then we might argue, if each of the pebbles in that perceived line represents the lifetime of a human being, and because they are lined up in this particular way, we can infer a continuity. In other words, this pebble here, this life, reincarnates as this next one, and then as the next, because they appear to continue each other, forming a coherent line. We speak of a line of descent, a line of succession. This is precisely what happens, and you in your mind perceive that continuity within this system, just as you perceive the continuity of a wave moving across the water, even though fundamentally no specific water is moving laterally, only up and down. So in the same way as I explained this morning, you consider that you, sitting here now, are the same person who walked in through the door a little while ago. Yet, in a profound sense, you are not, you have changed completely, a continuous flow of molecular and energetic transformation. This means, in other words, that if I insist upon seeing this continuity of lives, then I am effectively reincarnating. But if I realize, however, that my perception of a line here is purely a projection of my mind, a pattern I am imposing, then in that realization, I am liberated. Or, we could approach it in another way. You don't have to perceive a straight line to establish connections. Let's imagine that these are all pebbles in a stream, and what will create connections between them is the journey of a small figure who wants to cross the stream. So, he places his foot on a pebble here. Which next one can he reach? He can get to that one, and then perhaps to that one. Wowie, he might exclaim, I'm going to have a little problem going on from there. But perhaps, with a small jump, he can land on another, and then another. And whoops, with another jump, he hits a farther one. You see, it all depends on the stretch, the distance he can bridge. And because each pebble is within a reachable stretch, that creates another reason for establishing a line of continuity, for being able to perceive a significant connection between any of the members of the group. What you are doing here, you see, is making sense out of a multitude of human lives, in just the same way that you make sense out of anything else. It's the way you make sense out of a Rorschach blot. And after all, the entire world is in a sense a grand Rorschach blot. Everything in it is a pattern waiting to be interpreted. What we are constantly doing is making sense out of wiggly processes. You see it wherever you fly across the world in a plane. The landscape often begins to look rectangular, or you see straight lines, clear triangles, or perfect circles, and you know that human beings have been active there. Where humans haven't been around, the outlines of everything are wiggly, like the meandering courses of rivers, the organic shapes of mountains and forests. This is because human beings are always trying to straighten things out, to impose order. But we ourselves are not straight. We are fundamentally wiggles, and we are interminably wiggling. Yet we strive to regulate our wiggling by establishing ourselves in houses, by traveling along streets with traffic lights and regulations. But the underlying reality is that we are wiggling, and our attempts to straighten out this wiggling are themselves simply another form of wiggling. So the whole world, and especially us, is a Rorschach blot, and science itself is the art of trying to make unanimous sense of this blot. Science doesn't claim that there are certain fixed laws of nature which things must obey, as if the wiggly events of the world are running on predetermined tram lines compelled to follow them. No, the point is that in order to make sense out of what is going on, because there's no inherent way to make sense, as sense and order are intrinsically linked, we invent orders, and then we describe the way things fit into them. In our pebble analogy, here is the scatter of stones, but it just so happens that I scattered them over a regularly spaced floor where each plank is evenly divided, and so I can classify every stone by numbering the board it's on. By doing that, I'll be able to identify them, and I'll be able to discuss various regularities in the way they fell. When I threw them out like that, certain dynamic principles were involved, and these principles can be measured and discussed in terms of the intervals at which all the stones landed. But in truth, I invented the order. That order of distances between the divides and the boards is just as much a projection upon the formation of the stones as is considering, for example, that a particular group lies in a straight line. It's something projected onto it. So in precisely this way, we are constantly projecting an order onto a wiggly universe. It's the only way for our minds to make sense out of it. And to a very certain degree, this projection is valid. Because after all, wiggles, although they are often very irregular, do possess a certain underlying regularity. And you can only discern that there's regularity in wiggles because there's also irregularity, and vice versa. Through noticing these regularities, you begin to perceive a consistency in the behavior of events. And if you dig consistency, you might say, "Great, let's do it again." You might exclaim, "This was fine. Oh, that wiggle was beautiful. Once more, please." Yes, and then you begin to appreciate irregularities less, because, gee, if I were living in a world where I had no idea what was going to happen next, suddenly an earthquake, suddenly bang, the whole thing vanishes. That could be crazy. It could be great, but we don't truly settle for that, do we? We like to think that things will continue, as long as it doesn't get too monotonous and boring. So therefore we are constantly scanning the field of experience for regularities, and thus we build up our hang-ups. It's got to happen every day. The mail's got to be delivered every day. You've got to keep doing your work. You've got to eat regular meals, all that kind of jazz. And so it keeps going, because we're looking for this regularity thing. But once again, you see, the Buddhists gently propose, do you know this thing, this reality, is actually neither truly regular nor truly irregular. You can choose to perceive it however you wish. What value do you want to put on these pebbles? What pattern do you want to see in them? Or do you want to see them in what Buddhists call their suchness? This, dear friend, is the profound point of the sand and rock garden at Ryoanji in Japan. You go there, and you see a beautiful, serene stretch of white sand with 5 carefully placed rocks upon it. And boy, those Zen masters truly got away with murder, didn't they? They arranged those rocks in the garden, and everyone comes to look at it, and they instinctively feel, there must be some deep meaning in this. And so little guidebooks emerge, attempting to explain what it's supposed to be. Some say, well, it's supposed to represent an ocean with islands in it. Others suggest, oh, it's a beach with rocks on it. Still others propose, well, these rocks have a certain dynamic relationship, and they represent various Buddhist principles. There's even a delightful, quaint Zen monk at Daisen, another rock and sand garden, who gives a lecture in English. He doesn't speak English, but he has memorized a specific English lecture, which meticulously explains the symbolism of all the various rocks, how they interact, and how they eventually lead you to the ocean of liberation. All of this, dear listener, is made up out of whole cloth. Because the profound point of a Zen garden is precisely that it doesn't mean any more than these scattered pebbles mean, or any more than anything else truly means. The mountain over here, the flowing water, the way the coastline unfolds, and here we are, all of us simply wiggling. Only because I am speaking, and you have attributed a certain sense to my words, you might believe that I am communicating something fixed and absolute. But in truth, everything we are doing, everything we are experiencing is like this. Now we are often raised to think, oh, that's too bad if that's all it is. If it's just this suchness, if it's just an arrangement that randomly fell out like that, what's the point? Life seems meaningless and empty, without purpose and so on. But this feeling, this sense of lack, is simply because you have been conditioned, through all your thinking, to expect that things must be meaningful. When you utter the phrase, well, life doesn't have any meaning, it's only because you've had it deeply drilled into you that it ought to have meaning. So you then strive to create a meaning out of it. If, on the other hand, nobody had ever told you that life ought to have a meaning, that it ought to make some sense, that it ought to be going somewhere, and that you should survive, then you wouldn't expect it. You would simply dig it as it happens. So truly, what this profound wisdom is saying is not that things are meaningless, nor that they are inherently meaningful. It's simply that they simply happen to be spread this way. And so there is no fixed, prescribed way you should look at it. This brings us to what is called the first principle of the Buddha's Eightfold Path, Samyak Drishti, which means perfect view. I remember once when the esteemed Buddhist scholar D.T. Suzuki was giving a lecture about Buddhism, he said, in his gentle, inimitable way, the fourth noble truth of Buddhism is called the Noble Eightfold Path. First step of Noble Eightfold Path is called Shennen, means right view. O Buddhism sum up in right view? Then he paused, a twinkle in his eye, and added, second step of Noble Eightfold Path is, oh I forget second step. You better look it up in the book anyway. A delightful moment, revealing the essence. Right view, you see, does not mean right in the sense of a single particular correct view that one should adopt. Rather, it means the complete view, which is, paradoxically, having no fixed view at all. So, in other words, if you ask what is the correct position of the stars in the Great Dipper, the Big Dipper, the answer is, it depends on where you're looking from. There is no such thing as the single, absolutely correct position of those stars. In the same gentle way, what is the right interpretation of these scattered pebbles? It depends entirely on how you choose to look at it. There was a famous Zen master named Ikkyu, who had a wonderfully gnarled, crooked pine tree growing in front of his monastery. One day he pinned a notice on it that read, "I will pay 1,000 yen to anybody who can see this tree straight." So all sorts of people came, standing on their heads, looking at it in weird and contorted ways, trying to somehow align the branches to see them all straight. And then one very clever man arrived, looked at the tree for a while, and then went off to see another priest, a friend of Ikkyu's. He said, "Look, what is this thing Ikkyu is doing? How would you see that tree straight?" The friend replied, "Simply, you look straight at it." So the man returned to Ikkyu, confidently claiming the 1,000 yen. "All you have to do," he declared, "to see the tree straight, is to look straight at it." And Ikkyu, with a knowing, funny look, forked out the 1,000 yen, and said, "You must have been talking to my friend the priest down the road." So what, truly, are we doing, dear listener? You possess a universe in which you are living that is fundamentally wiggly, like this. And you, yourself, are an event, a particular expression within this grand wiggle. Only you are constantly striving to straighten it out, to impose order on it, to perceive a fixed structure within its fluid nature. And your very act of doing this, of trying to straighten things, is itself another unique wiggle within the whole. After all, you might argue that certain elements within this vast cosmic dance are indeed straight, or orderly, or possess whatever other quality you wish to attribute, and we are like that. We are something within this intricate dance that possesses, in its very nature, the inclination to arrange things this way and that, to desire to see things straight. But in reality, there isn't anything, anywhere in the entire arrangement that represents the only right way of doing it. And there isn't anything in life, in your life, that is definitively supposed to happen. You're not supposed to live to be 80, or to die when you're 23. It doesn't make the slightest difference. You can experience one or the other. That is why they say, in a beautiful ancient verse, "In the scenery of spring, there is nothing superior, nothing inferior. Flowering branches grow naturally, some short, some long." So liberation, dear friend, is the profound realization that there is no fixed, predetermined way that things are supposed to be. You don't have to go on living. You are what there is. It's truly up to you to decide. In the deepest sense, there is no external absolute dictum for how it has to happen. But on the other hand, if you wish to feel that there is some way you would like to arrange this, if you want to gently push these pebbles around, to place them in some kind of order that feels right to you, that's perfectly okay too. The crucial point, the source of peace, is this: you will be miserable, or experience frustration, to the degree that you are hung up on the notion that things should or must go a certain way. That is to say, to hold a fixed view. If you cultivate no fixed view, you remain elastic, flexible, open to the ever-unfolding nature of reality. And about this elasticity, this freedom from fixed views, there is always something that can't quite be fully articulated. When we say, "I have no fixed view," it might at first sound as if one was simply an empty vessel, a non-entity. A Chinese proverb speaks of a hollow room that echoes all sounds, suggesting that an empty mind is open to all suggestions, perhaps even passively susceptible. But there is another, far richer sense of an empty mind than that. Not the moronic, passive empty mind, but the lively empty mind. The empty mind that possesses the vibrant capacity to either let things be, allowing them to unfold in their natural suchness,